Hello and welcome to our Fulbright Speakers Series event, Academic Frontiers, Leadership and Innovation in Higher Education Today. I'm Dr. Jim Fatzinger, a Fulbright alumnus, current member of the Fulbright Specialist roster, and president of the Kentucky chapter of the Fulbright Association. I'm an American Council on Education Fellow, hosted by Clemson University, a charter senior associate provost responsible for founding the first four-year public institution of the 21st century, and also an adjunct faculty member at Vanderbilt University. I'm honored to kick off today's discussion. As a Fulbrighter, I, like you, share a deep commitment to global education and academic leadership, and I'm excited for the conversation that we're going to have today together. The Fulbright Speakers Series is a dynamic platform for thought-provoking conversations that advance the Fulbright Association's mission of fostering international understanding and collaboration. Its purpose is to inspire action, deepen cross-cultural connections, and highlight ideas that move institutions and communities forward. Today's theme, Leadership and Innovation in Higher Education, speaks directly to the challenges and opportunities universities face today. In particular, our speakers will explore how academic freedom and institutional transformation are essential to a university's role in modern society. This is a timely discussion where panelists will address both the importance of academic freedom and the contemporary challenges it encounters. As president of the Kentucky Chapter Board and Executive Committee, I also want to acknowledge our local Fulbright community. Our chapter's mission aligns closely with the broader Fulbright mission. We focus on building relationships, networks, and opportunities grounded in service and scholarship. To build and to bring alumni together, we host an annual picnic, the chapter's first project and still one of our best attended events. And we launched the Kentucky Summer of Service Challenge to highlight how alumni continue serving their communities long after their exchange experiences conclude. These initiatives reflect our commitment to Fulbright's ideals of service and mutual understanding, and we're proud to be part of this community in today's event. Now, I'm pleased to introduce our moderator and panelists, whose diverse expertise will enrich today's discussion. Beginning with Dr. Carol Levander. She is Rice University's Vice President for Global and Digital Strategy. She leads Rice's expansion of international research centers and digital learning initiatives and has extensive experience advising on Fulbright programs and educational technology projects. She's recognized as one of the most creative and innovative leaders in higher education today and is a former leader of a National Fulbright Association Board of Directors. Dr. Levander will be our moderator today. Alongside is Dr. Basil Smikle. Dr. Smikle is a professor of practice and director of the Masters of Science in Nonprofit Management at Columbia University School of Professional Studies. Dr. Smikle brings deep experience in nonprofit strategy, civic engagement, and public policy. Dr. Paul Boxer is a professor of psychology at Rutgers University, Newark, and a faculty affiliate in social work and criminal justice. Dr. Boxer researches juvenile delinquency and has helped develop Rutgers' fully online juvenile justice program. His work on cross-institutional collaboration and academic freedom brings an evidence-based perspective on prevention, equity, and innovation. James Colman is a Senior Associate Director of Undergraduate Admissions at Georgetown University. Mr. Colman oversees a values-driven, holistic admissions strategy and has led recruitment efforts to expand access for first-generation and low-income students, aligning admissions policy with institutional mission and equity. Each of these experts brings a distinct and valuable perspective, from values-driven admissions to policy leadership, digital innovation, and evidence-based research. Together, they give us a range of insight that we will need to tackle rapid technological change, economic pressures, and the urgent call for equity in higher education. So let's begin our conversation. Dr. Levander, we'll begin with you.
All right, well, let's get started then. Thanks for that wonderful introduction. This is going to be a tremendous discussion. Very excited to be moderating and helping to lead it today. And so I'd like to begin the discussion with a general question for each of our three discussants. And that question, really quick, simple, and profound: what do you see as the biggest challenge and opportunity in higher education today? And let's start with Basil first.
Thank you very much. I actually couch it in terms of two things: access and opportunity. With respect to access, I think some of the challenges are well documented. We may get into some of the details of it, but when you think about the SCOTUS decision with respect to affirmative action, when you think about the changes that this administration is bringing to student loans, we also think about the chilling effect that some of the decisions in DC have been have the chilling effect that's been placed on nonprofits that help with the pipeline of sending students to colleges, particularly some of the top tier institutions. There are big questions about who now gets to go to college and what that's going to look like in the near and long term. But I also think, when you consider so many of the students who are first generation college students and indeed first generation Americans for whom college is an extraordinary economic generator. I still think that will be true as we move forward. But the question again is who actually gets to go. So I think for our colleges and universities is about continuing to center the student experience, to continue to, from the college standpoint, certainly faculty standpoint, to make sure we can still have open dialogue. And I think what's been great is that the students still feel that they can come to us as faculty members to have great conversations, to be able to help them not just on campus, but in their career going forward. And we can still be an incredible resource for them throughout their sort of adult life.
That's terrific. And James, tell me what you think the biggest opportunity and challenge are today.
Sure. Well, I'll start off with the challenge. I think the biggest challenge may be trust. Families question the cost and the purpose of higher education. We see that across all sorts of surveys. Certainly, you see it in the news. I think one of the things is making sure that we are able to show families and students where the great benefits lie in having the experience of having higher education, but also the variety of opportunities that exist out there for students, that there's no one size fits all. And I think that also lends itself into sort of the opportunity, both in terms of being able to express the variety of higher educational institutions and opportunities that exist out there, that no one size fits all necessarily, but also too, as Basil mentioned, getting to the access piece, making sure that the door is open wider without lowering the bar, and making sure that students understand that there's a welcoming place for everybody and that we can find the right fit for everybody and lead to great success for all of those students who choose to go and attend higher educational institutions. I think if we meet that challenge, it could be really transformational, both for higher educational institutions, but also for all the parties who participate and engage with our communities.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And Paul, what are your thoughts?
Sure. Well, let me first say that I certainly agree with the points that have already been made by my colleagues up here. So my comments are not meant to disagree, but rather to add to that. I think in terms of the broadest challenge that we are facing right now in higher education, it is the series of politically motivated attacks that the higher education sector has been receiving from both the federal and various state governments, not only in terms of dramatic, just extremely massive cuts to our scientific research infrastructure and ongoing research enterprise, but also to challenges with respect to incursions into curriculum and faculty and staff governance over curriculum, and all the different things that we hold dear in higher education with respect to protecting academic freedom and the scholarly enterprise. So those are a series of challenges that we have got to deal with at all possible levels in higher education. But at the same time, the flip side of that is it presents a really interesting opportunity that I don't think many of us in higher ed have had to face, certainly not faculty, from the standpoint of really, as James kind of alluded to, highlighting the value that we provide not only to our students directly through education, through credentials, et cetera, but to the broader society in terms of the benefits of the research and scholarly inquiry that we do in higher education. For example, there was a survey done not too many months ago. The results were reported in NPR, suggesting that something like 90% of the American public, American adults, utilize some kind of technology that was developed through academic research, but only about 10% of the population even are aware of the fact that that was the pipeline that led to those products. And so I think we have a lot of work to do to continue to highlight our value and expand understanding of our value, while at the same time really digging into get back to the core principles that guide our work and protect the academic freedom that we hold very, very dearly.
Thank you three for really insightful and I think very helpful comments for our conversation today. I'd like to start with the first question, which focuses on admission strategy, and I think it really resonates with Basil, your focus on access, and James, some of your comments as well. And so let me just start by asking, look, many universities are now shaping, our processes around core values in different ways. So early decisions, standard applications. What are the implications of our changing approaches to admissions on issues of campus diversity, student success? How are we seeing the changes we're making at the beginning of the pipeline impacting the students, the composition of the students, and their success? Anyone who would like to start, but maybe if no one is too excited, maybe we'll ask James, and this is a bit in your wheelhouse.
Sure. I think it's the case that institutions, as mentioned earlier by Basil and also by Paul, with the challenges being put forward by changes in federal policy in particular, we've had to revisit how it is that we go out and engage with potential members of our community. A lot of it has to do with, in essence, broadening the pipeline in a way, making sure that more people feel welcome into that process. A lot of it is identifying geographic locations, identifying schools and communities that perhaps have not considered institutions such as ours in the past, and going out there, reaching out directly, but also taking advantage of the many new tools that are now available. If there's a positive that perhaps can be taken from the recent unpleasantness with COVID-19, for example, is that it forced institutions which can be rather slow to change, sclerotic in some cases, to really take a look at how best to utilize the technology that had come into its own to bring our institutions to families, to bring families to our institutions through these virtual processes. And I think that's helped a great deal to reduce the barriers to entry for a lot of people. Heretofore, students would learn about these institutions either by maybe speaking to their high school counselors, who have to be aware of 4,000 different college universities around the country. It's hard to keep up with it all. But also, two, it would be at the expense of universities to send individual admissions officers out, perhaps, or have alumni representatives, or for the families to take the time and the treasure to travel to visit these college universities. But by making online virtual information sessions, online tours, having videos that people can click to asynchronously and investigate these institutions when it's most convenient for them, it certainly brings our institutions out to a wider audience, I think, much more effectively than it had been before. And even now, summer months are ending, students are beginning school, they have less opportunity to go and physically visit our institutions. They can still reach out to us, they can still connect with us, and we can still help share information, perhaps reduce some of the concerns they might have about, A, will I get in? But also, two, how will I afford that institution if I am admitted? What are those different opportunities? And getting back to Paul's comments earlier, what are the benefits that come from having these kinds of experiences? We can highlight them more effectively, both in person, but now also asynchronously.
Yeah, I'd add quickly to that because Paul's at Rutgers, Newark. I did a year at Rutgers, Newark in the Public Affairs and Administration program, and taught there for a year and loved it, and taught at the City University of New York in their School of Labor and Urban Studies. And what I saw were people who didn't have traditional college and career paths that saw a real opportunity, because the schools extended it to those communities and those constituencies, had a real opportunity to go to school. One of my students worked at a Quiznos, I think it was, and was in her uniform at a table in the restaurant taking my class. That shows an extraordinary amount of resilience on her part, but it also shows the kind of flexibility that schools have had to create and expand upon to really say we need to reach these communities and constituencies. So that to me is, to things that James and Paul have already said, that has been so critically important, because especially when you're coming off of COVID, especially when there are concerns about cost and the ways in which and the job opportunities thereafter, incredibly critical. And one of the things that we certainly experience at Columbia, and I imagine my colleagues here do as well, are the changes that immigration policy has brought to our schools. And we've seen it in our enrollment. We've heard from students who have admitted but decided not to commit because they're concerned about what happens when they get here, if they'll be able to stay. And that concern, I do think, has a very strong chilling effect, and we've seen an uptick, a reduction on our side, but an uptick in foreign students attending courses in the UK and in Canada because of that dynamic. So it changes the dynamic in the classroom. It changes the interaction on campus. That kind of warm, welcoming, inviting international campus is being threatened, and that is one of the biggest challenges for access in the short term and in the long term, I think.
Yeah, I think, I don't envy the folks who work in admissions, James. I don't envy the position of, I think it's a real interesting marketing challenge because, at least from where I sit as a member of the faculty, we are trying to entice students to come to receive benefits that are very difficult to convey in terms of the kinds of benefits that we know they're going to get from the experience versus the benefits that they see as part of the experience, right? So they might want to go to a campus that is beautiful, that has stately old buildings, that has wonderful recreational facilities, that has great access to public transportation. And, Rutgers Newark, one of our selling points in admissions is, hey, in 20 minutes, you can be on a train and be in New York City and, hang out in New York City, right? I mean, these are the things that initially at the start of a student's undergraduate career seem very appealing for good reason. But, as faculty, as folks who work within these institutions, we also know that you should come here because we're going to teach you how to think. And you should come here because we are going to expose you to a degree of racial, ethnic, geographic, socioeconomic diversity that you have never experienced before, and you're going to benefit from that too. So, I mean, James, I don't even know how you convey that kind of messaging, but like that is really, we are trying to sell some things that they can't quite even grasp at the beginning of their college career.
Absolutely. And just to follow up on that a little bit, it's a Sisyphean task, right? Because for every cohort of applicants and enrolling students that you have, you've got to do it all again. That boulder is rolled back down the hill and you're going to push it back up. That's where, to expand on this a little bit, our partnerships, I think, with schools, the counselors, with, CBO partners are really helpful, because when you can connect with a Basil or a Paul who are working in a school or working for that CBO that works with maybe first generation college bound students, they may not have a great many kids who would be a particularly good fit for this institution or that institution this year, but they're going to be there next year and can communicate these opportunities to that next group of students for whom, let's say, a Georgetown or a Fordham or a Stanford or whoever it is that is connected might be a good fit. So it's those partnerships between our universities and those who are on the ground in the day-to-day working with these students. That's, I think, incredibly important. It's something that, getting back to what I mentioned earlier to Carolyn too, the technology has helped us a great deal too, because I don't envy those guys in terms of keeping up with all of the developments and changes in policies at each of our institutions. Gosh, that's a lot to do, but to be able to find that information or connect with us has been a real boon.
That's great. And that leads
If I
us
could
to
just,
I'm sorry, Basil, please.
No, I promise you'll be able to moderate. I just had to do it because it reminded me of this really important point, which is that, I've done a lot of work with high school students and trying to get them prepared for college. And one of the things that we learned in that experience is that a lot of times we package kids to go, but not to stay. And that being able to stay on campus, what the campus actually provides for those students, that supportive environment, that's really starting to, that is really being threatened right now. So as James and Paul have talked about, if we're not developing ambassadors to be able to talk about their experience on campus and bringing that next generation, if that's being threatened, and I always go back to pipeline, it's a big issue for me, that pipeline really starts to become a real challenge because, yeah, we can do a lot of things to try to get students into college, but getting them to stay, feel comfortable and confident in the work that they're doing and their ability to succeed once they leave, that is a much more intensive process that I know I benefited from in my undergraduate experience, and I would want that to be the case for students today.
That's great and wonderful discussion there. And I almost hate to move us to the next question, but I've got to. And it really comes out of this this initial response, and that is, community partnerships, right? They can be so impactful for student well-being, success, ability to persist. Have you seen universities, or what examples of universities' effective collaboration with community partnerships, local organizations are out there? And I think even, in addition to local organizations like the Fulbright, for example. So both in the community, but also, a little more macro, and just anyone who would like to start that discussion is welcome to.
Well, I'll just say real quickly, I'm a big believer in the role and presence of universities in their local communities. At Rutgers Newark and Basil, you know this if you were with us even for a year, Rutgers Newark takes its role as an anchor institution in the Newark community very, very seriously. There's a variety of examples of the kind of work that my campus does in the community, but the one with which I'm most familiar is our role in kind of the local criminal justice scene in terms of collaborations with local police departments, other law enforcement entities, but also social and behavioral and mental health service organizations that work with kids, families, et cetera, who might become entangled in the justice system in one way or another. We've done data analysis. We've done direct cooperation with local law enforcement on program implementation. We've worked with community-based organizations in terms of enhancing their services and their accessibility and bringing folks together around the table in sort of a neutral space to hash out some of the challenges and connecting and providing those resources. So I, as a community psychologist, of course, as well, I'm a big proponent of that kind of work. But I think I can imagine a college or university not having that kind of stake in what's happening around it. And of course, nationally, I mean, Fulbright and similar organizations are also important, but especially for, I think, a state university like Rutgers, where we do draw a lot of our students from the local community, northern New Jersey, urban Essex County. It's very helpful and very important for them to see the ways in which their lived experiences then connect directly to what the universities are trying to do.
I think Paul makes a really great point. The notion too of the public universities, they are the real driver. When you think about it, we get often asked a lot of questions at Georgetown and places like it. Oh, what are you guys doing? And there's some really wonderful programs between the Prison and Justice Initiative, the Community Scholars Program, which has existed since 1968. These are all ways in which Georgetown has reached out to the DC area community to try to, in essence, improve our local community, being men and women for others, as the Jesuits would say, right? And yet at the same time, the volume of people that we're able to serve is just so much smaller than the public university systems out there. And I think that's one of the things that people need to keep in mind and support is this notion that whether it's Rutgers in New Jersey, or whether it's CUNY within New York City, or the SUNY system, or whether it's the University of Virginia system, these are the places that really drive the change in a lot of ways because they have the volume, they have the reach, the geographic reach all over the state, for example, that smaller institutions like ours, we can make an impact, but it won't be at quite the same level as places like a Rutgers, which I think, really deserve an incredible amount of credit for that outreach and that support.
Yeah, and we at Columbia have a Columbia Community Service, which intentionally supports the nonprofits in the community. We're the names have changed in the neighborhood quite frequently, but it's in Harlem, and the Harlemites take that very seriously. The map says Morningside Heights, but everybody would say it's in Harlem, and that relationship has not always been great. And Columbia did have a multi-billion-dollar expansion into West Harlem. For full disclosure, I did work on parts of that very, very early on. And one of the things that I tried to do with with working with the community was to actually get Columbia to kind of outline everything that they've done with the community, not just with the nonprofits, but also one of the things that doesn't get discussed as much are the vendor relationships that the university has with the surrounding community. And once they put all of that together and actually put it in one place, folks realize that they actually do a lot in the neighborhood, but nobody really knew it. Nobody talked a lot about it unless usually it would be a nonprofit because it might have been a significant, a grant of some kind. And Columbia would be invited to the table and to the discussions. But it is important that the university be part of the fabric of community, however that community is defined. But the important point there is that the community has to help them define that for that collective, right? Because it's very easy to sort of be this island of intellectual whatever on a hilltop, right? But it's a lot harder to actually go into community to say, hey, how are we good neighbors? How can we be better partners? And one thing that also, I don't think anybody in this conversation misses it, but something again that the outside of these environments, a lot of folks don't know is these institutions, not just ours, but others, are actually really big about hiring in community. And so you have a lot of folks from the neighborhood actually working for these institutions and then able to send their kids there potentially to get that education and then for them to go themselves as employees. And that, again, helps build community.
Yeah, I think
Basil, go ahead, Paul.
I was going to say real quick, I think Basil alluded to a really important point there with respect to the relationship between a university and the community that surrounds it. I mean, I definitely think, and I have seen colleagues make this mistake and go down this road. I do think it's easy for university-based folks to imagine that community support and community engagement is a given. Like, oh, welcome, Rutgers. We're so glad that you're here finally to come and save us from whatever we're in. And it's not. And early in my tenure track career, when I first got to Rutgers, New York, I was trying to do some collaborative research with the local school system, and it took a long time to develop some trust with them, partly because a local private university, which shall remain unnamed, in this context, had recently been to the community, done a bunch of surveying in the schools, and just simply packed up and left as soon as their grant ended, and there was no further contact. And so there was a lot of mistrust that had to be dealt with, and because when university researchers come in thinking, well, we're going to do this great service for you, help us, or do this for us. There really has to be an exchange, and there has to be a recognition that it is a two-way street, and that just as much as we might give at Rutgers to the community, and we can't just expect the community to give back, and there has to be a real collaborative, collegial, respectful process.
That's terrific. And I'd like to move on to the next question, please, in the interest of time, which kind of returns, Paul, to one of your first observations about the public's inability or to understand the research outcomes that universities provide for social betterment. And so can we talk a little bit about that gap, and are there best practices out there that universities might deploy to close that gap, because it is so important to the future of the industry?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think certainly within my wheelhouse of the kind of research that I do, community-based participatory research is increasingly the norm if you're going to be doing any kind of work that touches the community, in the sense that the researcher needs to be identifying key stakeholders with whom the research project can be collectively developed. In other words, it wouldn't just be me putting together a survey and saying, here's the things I want to know about, hand out my survey and let me know what the results are. It's rather, here's the kinds of things that I care about, that I study, that where I have my expertise, but what are the kinds of things that connect to this for you as a member of the community or as a stakeholder that you also are curious about or concerned about? And let's build this project together. And let's really engage the community in a way that ensures that the community has an absolute stake in the design of the project, the implementation of the project, and then whatever benefits come from the project. I think, as I was listening to you ask that question, Caroline, it occurred to me, training in CBPR, community-based participatory research, is absolutely something that should be required of folks who sit in the kind of chairs where I sit. And actually, I'm going to tell you right now, when we get off this call today, I'm going to reach out to our institutional review board and suggest that that become a mandatory part of our training.
Fantastic.
It's not.
Other thoughts on this question of, public and research findings in universities?
I'll add to Paul's earlier point, which is that it's important to do it in partnership with community. That sometimes, for a lot of communities, particularly ones that feel that they've been poked and prodded way too much for no public benefit. It's important to do it in partnership, but the partnerships can exist and can flourish if there is real conversation on both sides. Now, having said both sides between parties and it's open and honest. Now, having said that, I at Columbia and actually live a few blocks from the hospital, which is one of the biggest research facilities in the country, and to see the work that goes on there, to recognize that so much of it had been threatened and has been threatened because of the targeting of the university and all that it's had to go through, and similar universities across the country, and have those resources pulled. It does have real world effects. It hurts the ability for the PhDs of the researchers to be able to do their work. You can't, deal with some of the most important health concerns in communities like Washington Heights, where this hospital is, where I live in Upper Manhattan. Some of the biggest the biggest issues that affect community physically, mentally, are being studied just a few blocks away. And when you don't have, when the resources are in danger of being committed, and you don't have the researchers themselves, that all of that work gets stymied. One of the biggest HIV and AIDS researchers in the world is a few blocks away, and has had their money pulled. So what happens there? And so I think we not only need to talk about the local impacts, but the global impacts on our work, and why. And it goes back to, I think, Paul and James's earlier point. This is the selling point of the university. It is the ability to come in and do amazing things for vast amounts of people, and the contributions that can be made. So yeah, it's something that's being threatened, but I think people are starting to recognize why it's important to keep these, to keep this work going.
So let me ask all three of you then. You've observed that universities are shaped by public discourse. What role should universities play in shaping the public discourse about higher education in America today?
I'll take a crack at it. I mean, I think one of the things that university presidents could do a better job of is explaining the impact, as Paul and Basil have mentioned, of universities, not just on sort of the immediate student population that happens to be physically present on our campus, the connections with faculty members, the degree you're going to get, the return on investment in terms of employment. I mean, we can do that as admissions offices and as career centers, et cetera. But to talk about the philosophical impact of the notion of the university on the discovery of new knowledge, the imparting of knowledge on a wider variety of people, as Paul pointed out too, the impact of university research and developments on society as a whole. Paul mentioned the impact of the research that take place at universities, but there are other institutions, NASA, for example, private institutions as well, that have come up with technologies or innovations that have had an incredible impact on how our societies are run, the great wealth with which our modern nation states are able to have standards of living that would make the kings of yesteryear blush with envy in a lot of ways. And I think in some respects we've become so focused on ourselves, in terms of what is our what is the pipeline of applicants to enrolling students? How are we going to fund this or that or the other program, that we've lost the forest for the trees? We're focused on the minutia and are not, in fact, elucidating the grander ideas that would help to develop and reinvigorate support for the very notion of academic freedom and universities as a social good that supports the entire, not just nation, but the entire world in a lot of ways. Anyway, I'm going to turn it over to my colleagues who I'm sure have much better phrases with regard to this.
I agree with that completely. I mean, I don't know at what point within academia we decided that we needed to be modest about our achievements, right? I mean, especially when I've seen some of my students, the kinds of dissertation projects they've done, for example, and they're sharing it and talking about it. And I say, and you know, I don't know how to explain this to my parents. They might say, like, just go brag about it. Like, you did an amazing project. It's really cool what you discovered and how you put it all together. I mean, I remember when I'm not trying to be political about this, but when the first American Recovery Act came out in 2008, 2009, and you would drive around and you'd see like a new highway construction project, and there'd be a big sign that said this project brought to you by the ARRA, right? Am I getting the acronym right? With the logo and all that. I mean, that's the kind of thing, for example, that I mean, I would love to see Rutgers do more of, right? And we have projects going on all around the state. As James alluded, you know, our reach, we have an extension office in every county in New Jersey. There was an article that came out in the Rutgers press yesterday about some new grape tomato that Rutgers ag researchers designed called the Scarlet Sunrise tomato. It's 2 colors, whatever. It seems like it tastes great. But you know, we should be out there really trumpeting the kinds of things that we're doing. People don't realize. I mean, to think that 90% of people are using the outcomes of scientific research and 10% realize it, to down to something like GPS, you don't realize it was developed in a scientific research lab. I mean, it's just incredible how much we undersell the achievements of university-based researchers, and I don't even just mean like medical, but across the board, in the humanities, in the arts, in literature. It's everywhere, and that value has to be brought forward.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything that was said. The 2 points that I would make, additional points I would make, if there is ever, there may not be a silver lining to a lot of what's taking place in terms of federal policy. I mean, we talked about opportunities earlier, but if there is one, there does need to be a conversation about the economics of higher ed and what that looks like now and what that looks like going forward. And one of the things that I've, said is that a lot of these, when a faculty member was concerned that, well, are they going after these schools because they want them to close? And I've said, no, I don't think they want them to close. I think they want to change who goes there, right? To kind of go back to undo so much of the work that occurred over the last several decades to increase access. And I think that's where college presidents, I think some have done well, particularly those at like Rutgers, Newark. I've talked to a lot of sort of tri-state area college presidents and admissions officers, and they're so centered in community that they're always about access. But I do think there's been so much work to make these environments less exclusive, but I think there is a retrenchment of that of sorts. There's an intention to go back to that. And that's, I think, something that we have to find a way, and hopefully I think we are finding a way to make sure that we push back on. So that's one point. But the other point, I think, is sort of related to everything that folks have said, which is that colleges and universities just they're aspirational for so many people, because they go into these environments thinking that their brain is going to expand, their opportunities are going to expand. They have something to brag to their parents about, to their friends about. And they, particularly those who are first generation college students, absolutely know what that degree does for their family economically. And I think that's one part of the story that it is challenging, right? Because some students, will come out, it might be hard for them to find a job, and we understand that. But the economic generator that college and universities provide for families is unmistakable. And that's an important part of the story that needs to be told.
Great, thank you all. Let's shift to AI. So there's been a lot of talk, around the news about AI and how it's going to disrupt every industry, including higher education. In fact, Fulbright Association had a wonderful speaker series on AI. And so just one of many forums for discussion on this topic. How do you see AI impacting every aspect of what we do in universities?
How about I start from the admission standpoint, and then gentlemen, as faculty members, you can sort of attack the further on the pipeline, so to speak. I think in a lot of ways, we're in the nascent early stages of the impact that artificial intelligence is going to have. But in a lot of ways, you can find analogs in earlier technologies as well. I think in many respects, the ways in which switching from slide rules to now graphing calculators, the sheer volume of information that is at our fingertips. The cell phones that we carry have greater computing power than anything that NASA worked with in the 60s or 70s or even 80s. That in a lot of ways, I think artificial intelligence should probably, and certainly for large language learning models in particular, should be looked at as new tools that would become embedded in almost everything that we do. And in a lot of ways, how we respond to it, whether it's the writing of essays for admissions applications, the reviewing of those admissions applications, we're going to have to integrate that into our thinking and learn how to use these tools effectively. Some of my colleagues have certainly gotten quite concerned about this. I don't want to say that they're neo-Luddites in this regard, but they sort of view this as the sky is falling kind of circumstance when it comes to universities being able to identify good potential new additions to our communities, because they feel, or believe, I should say, that students are going to be able to craft some sort of false impression of who they are when submitting applications. And then the Pauls and the Basils of the world are going to have to deal with the after effects of these students who got in under sort of false pretenses.
Mm-hmm.
And as I remind my colleagues, when it comes to things such as writing essays, the output from these LLMs is only as good as the input, in that the students themselves need to learn how to use these tools, number one, but also two, what do you think that students were doing with their English teachers or their parents or other friends who were helping them craft those essays prior to that? In a lot of ways, we should be looking at these tools as opportunities, perhaps to bring greater information. Those students who couldn't afford the private counselor or the private tutor now has access to information that maybe they didn't have before, can get feedback on their writing, as an example. And so we as admissions offices need to adjust to that. And I'm going to turn it over to Paul and to Basil, because I'm sure on the inside of the university, boy, there's probably even a lot more going on than I even realize. Paul, Basil?
Well, in the interest of not being seen as a neo-Luddite, I'll start by saying I've embraced most technology. I mean, I certainly appreciate doing my lectures using PowerPoint as opposed to transparencies and those pens that you had to write with. Those were awful. But at the same time, I'm not I think I'm a ways away from becoming a true believer in the power of AI, at least from the standpoint of writing. I understand the perspective of, students need to come in, and if they're going to use AI, they have to know what questions to ask, what essay prompts to put in. But, I don't have it on my phone anymore. But when I first heard about ChatGPT, I did add it to my phone just to play around with it. And I said something like, write me an essay about, I don't know, it was an assignment I'd given my students. And it produced not a great, amazing essay, but it produced an essay that certainly had some sort of structural integrity to it, and the themes were there and that sort of thing. And so I would disagree that a student needs to be skilled in using ChatGPT or other AI prompts to generate something like that. So I'm very cautious about it. I think if we can, for me, and I'll stop talking for a moment, but a silver lining to this has been I'm going to have my students writing a lot more than using pen and paper than they ever have. I'm going to have a lot, and I'm using short answer essays more in my exams than I ever have, because with pencil and paper, because I don't want them to be relying on AI models for writing where they're not going to be learning anything. Now, of course, in the past, yeah, people help each other with the writing; they still do. But the act of completely removing all effort, I think it's only going to be damaging down the line.
Yeah, it has presented a lot of challenges as faculty, because if you have a student that hasn't spoken all semester, and you have now this beautiful essay in front of you, right at the end, they're like, how do you judge that, right? And so it has put a lot more, we've had to put a lot more effort into making sure that we have more opportunities to evaluate in a very raw way. So we have a lot more opportunities to evaluate raw skill of the students, so that we can remove any potential for sort of gaming the class and the course through using AI. And I think that's what we're getting to, right? Which is, maybe it's a good research assistant, but it shouldn't replace sort of original thought, original research, or your ability to develop a strong, coherent argument using data. And I think, so the challenge is, how do we, as faculty members, understand that it might be helpful, as opposed, going to Google Scholar instead of the card catalog and understanding the Dewey Decimal System. Do they even teach that anymore? I don't know. But so the advances can come and they can be helpful and be an aid. But if part of our job is to evaluate the growth from first semester to from first day of class to 14th day of class, there's still a lot of human input and judgment that is required.
I don't envy you guys with this, because you guys are right on the frontier of it for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're talking about, the potential for like an epigenetic impact on things like simply the ability to write, to craft any kind of original writing. I mean, if you think about, for example, how COVID, impacted students' isolation and mental health, large scale, massive impact. Everybody was hit at the same time in the same kind of way, and then we see the after effects of it in terms of students' loneliness and ability to connect and that sort of thing. Now we're saying from the very beginning of their education, and I'm going down to K-12 at this point, the second students in K through 12 have to start writing original essays. If they are able to start relying on these AI models, they are going to be missing what I think we would all agree is a really fundamental aspect of cognitive and intellectual development, which is learning how to put words together and string together some sentences and some paragraphs. And sure, I'm certain we'll still have great novelists, because there's going to be just those unique talents who won't do that. But what are we down the line going to be missing in terms of everyday journalists, writers, the creative arts, all these different ways in which writing is manifest in our society? If everything becomes kind of, I hate to use the phrase because it's not a great phrase, but the AI slop idea of just all this writing coming jumbled out like that without any more originality left, because students are from a very early age relying on it. It's almost, it's dystopian really to think about it that way.
Gosh, you're mentioning of the journalism piece, seeing the number of institutions that have cut journalists and replaced them with AI generated text. I mean, you read it and you're thinking, this is absolute drivel. Gosh, you're right. I mean, you don't want to see that become, the norm in a lot of ways.
Academic freedom is under fire right now. I'd love your thoughts. Should we defend academic freedom? If so, why? And if the answer to that is yes, how do we do a better job of it? How do we join forces? What strategies would we use? Anyone want to start?
The answer is
Paul
yes.
should go, because he's been leading on this. Yeah.
The answer is yes. Professionally speaking, maybe it's one of the few things I would even possibly defend to the death. I think it's that important to what we do. It has limits, of course, right? I was actually just talking about this yesterday with a number of colleagues. Academic freedom doesn't mean that, oh, I have a PhD and I'm a professor, I can do whatever I want now. Academic freedom means that within my domain of expertise, the things that I study, the discipline that I work in, the kind of research that I do, I am free to study any aspect of that I want, using the materials and methods that are part of my discipline. And if it takes me in a direction of something that is, unpleasant or socially abnormal, whatever it happens to be, I can keep pursuing that in the quest for truth or knowledge or some kind of scientific certainty in that domain. So I think As long as we are clear on what the parameters of academic freedom actually are, we absolutely should be defending it. In terms of how we defend it, I think that's a really open question. I would love to hear from my colleagues here about that. I think on the one hand, we have to imagine, for example, that what happened in Texas, in Indiana, and in Florida, in terms of the legislation that was put in place to take tremendous state control over the public universities there, we have to think about that in a way from the standpoint of what kind of legislation would we need on the other side to protect public universities from that kind of incursion. That is something we're discussing in New Jersey. I shouldn't say, I don't mean from the standpoint of like reaching out to the legislature at this point, but certainly within Rutgers with my colleagues, we're talking about ways to think about legislation like that would say, hey, faculty set curriculum, faculty set their own research agendas. An elected official, a political appointee can't come into Rutgers and say, or any state university and say, hey, I want you only to study this and I don't want you to study that anymore. We have to figure out legislative fixes and solutions to ensure that academic freedom is solid and protected and stays in place so that we can continue to have the outcomes and the innovations and the value to society that we've been doing for, I don't know, centuries.
Yeah. I agree with everything Paul said. I only add these two other points, which are, from my perspective, my mother was a public school teacher for 30 years. She taught special ed in the New York City public school system. And when I got my doctorate in education politics, I asked her, like, what was your goal for me, as a kid? And she said, I only ever wanted to make you intellectually curious. And you know what? That first and foremost, only a teacher would say that, right? But it also reminds that in many ways, teaching is a calling. I think of it as that. It's not just a job. It really is a calling to be there for your students, particularly at this moment, to be emotionally available to your students. Because one of the jobs that we have is to protect them. When there were concerns about ICE raids on campus, we had to figure out what do we do as faculty members, right? The care and concern, and I always say this: care and concern for community is not passive. So the ability for our intellectual curiosity as faculty members to be able to translate that to the student is not passive. They come with some. We hope to bring some more to their life and to their experience, and provide the tools for them to go out and explore their world. That's such a human thing, right? To observe and ask questions, and that's what we do. And if we can't do that because someone who isn't as interested in the potential outcomes, or is interested in a specific outcome, is trying to micromanage that process, that is a massive problem. And which brings me to the second point very quickly, because when Paul talked about Florida, it's not just, it reminds me of the example, it's not just about what the faculty do in the classroom. It's also through the programs at the university. So if you consider there was a bill, and this was since stripped out of it, a bill in Florida to restrict monies going to student organizations. And I'm a member of a Black Greek organization, Alpha Fraternity Incorporated, the first Black Greek-led organization in the country. There was legislation to essentially get them off of campuses, or at least starve them to the point where they can't exist on college campuses. But the work that these organizations do to help further the sort of academic experience of students through faculty members and through curriculum and programming was and is also being threatened. And that's something we also need to stand up for.
I think you guys made incredibly good points about this. And one of the things that we on the admission side sometimes get this question from families and students, and I'm often reminded of the fact that the notion of academic freedom isn't only about faculty, but it's about that student body too. And as Basil sort of alluded to, this notion that when you have a class, we're shaping a community here, and that we want the students, to be able to wrestle with challenging, difficult ideas. Sometimes, we highlight the fact that we have students coming from all over the world who bring a variety of backgrounds and experiences and opinions and ideas. And in some cases, students are going to find that peers hold positions or ideas that are very different from what they anticipated. And makes them think through, well, what it is that I do believe and why. And we think that ultimately that helps all of our students, right? That it allows them to have that open inquiry, but to go through that self-discovery that's so important as part of the educational mission of our institution, so that when they go out into the world, they not only continue to have developed this nimbleness of mind, this adaptability that's going to serve them well in the career front, but it's going to serve them well as they become members of our republic, our democracy, our shaping our broader culture. And I think that's part of the issue that some outside of the academy forget about, is that they think it's only about, oh, does Paul or does Basil, do they get to say whatever it is they want on anything? Oh, I don't like that. I want to challenge that. I want to restrict that. But they forget that in so doing, they're snuffing out the opportunity for students to go and broaden their horizons in so many different ways. So I think that's where, getting back to Carolyn, your question, I think academic freedom is incredibly important to defend, and to defend it from the many different in the many different ways in which it has positive impacts on our broader society.
Really wonderful. And as we get to the end of our time together, look, we've talked about academic freedom. We've talked about artificial intelligence. We've talked about the current political challenges and opportunities universities face. We've talked about access and equity and inclusion for students and for all of our community members. Could I just ask you, maybe as a final question, 5-10 years from now, what does success look like for our universities? We are at a time of a lot of change. We have, discussed a number of headwinds and opportunities to transform. 10 years from now, U.S. universities, what would you hope for them, for us?
I'll take a crack at it. And forgive me if this is inchoate and not particularly well considered a response. But I think one of the ways in which we could view success a decade from now or more is that the broader society, not only politically, but I think just in terms of the families involved, they recognize the importance of those difficult conversations that we were just discussing. I think in a lot of ways, academic freedom and that notion of open inquiry, of exploring, is the very root of the concept of the university or the college. When these were being organized in the Middle Ages, for example, the notion was you were bringing masters of various subject areas to teach the next generation of scholars, the students, and that it would have an impact not just on that niche community, but on that broader community, as Paul had alluded to, and as Basil had mentioned earlier. And I think we've gotten away from that in a lot of ways. And I don't want to, simplify it too much, but too many people pay attention to U.S. News and World Report rankings, and all they think about is sort of the horse race that is involved with where do different universities stack up, or what famous person graduated from what institution. In a lot of ways, it's how a lot of people view the election cycle in the United States. Who's leading? What sort of soundbite certainly popped up that caught everyone's attention. When ideally, what we're doing is looking at the deeper meaning behind what these institutions provide. And so that would, I think, be an incredible success. I don't know if we're going to get there, but I wouldn't mind seeing, for example, university presidents, instead of focusing on kowtowing to the latest fad or whoever happens to be in power politically at the given moment, but going out and articulating the mission of the university writ large and the benefits it supplies to all of society. I think that would be a major positive for not only these institutions here, but I think for society as a whole. Again, apologies, guys. I know that was rather inchoate, but hopefully, Paul, Basil, you guys can refine that even further.
I mean, I think you're talking and we're thinking about outcomes that are ultimately going to be somewhat difficult to measure and capture. Especially if we're talking about something like we want to see the public place greater value on what we do in higher education. I mean, I'm not sure exactly how we measure that. More people wearing, Georgetown, Columbia, and Rutgers sweatshirts around town. I mean, I don't know, right? We want to become more present and more vital or even more so than we are, or at least recognized to be so. And I appreciate your mention of the U.S. News rankings. I think maybe if we can get U.S. News to think about some other metrics that are important. So, for example, Rutgers Newark specifically, we are routinely in the top 10 rankings with respect to social mobility of our graduates and with our graduation rates of Pell Grant recipients specifically. And we are also the most diverse, or at least we're always jockeying, I think, with Queens College for the most diverse ethnically, racially student body in the country. Like, these are important things, right? That I would love to see more value placed on. We're at a very difficult time politically for that in this country, but 5, 10 years from now, I hope we're on the other side of this kind of tumult. I would love to see our research enterprise back up and running as it's been. It's going to be, I mean, the thing that we're ultimately going to have to face in higher ed, and I'm sorry to kind of be more doomsaying about this, but like right now we're still coasting on grants that have been restored that were already funded, over the last several years. We are going to be entering soon a time period where there will be no new grants being awarded. There's a massive drop off in the availability of funds. I do a lot of work with Department of Justice. I've done a lot of work with Department of Justice funding, for example. There are no RFPs to be found on this website of the research arm of DOJ right now. So there's going to be, things are going to get much more difficult before we get to the 5, 10-year period out where hopefully things are looking better. But in the meantime, we have to stay laser focused on the things that allow us to be what we are and promoting the value that we know we hold. So I'm sorry, that was a more negative answer than I wanted to provide.
No. In fact, I probably have a riff on that in a way, because I do, and as James, you talked about earlier, like I can't separate my answer from the politics of the day and the moment, right? And so one of the things that I am hopeful for is that, and if we talk about the politics of today, we recognize that a lot of young voters have no faith in our institutions whatsoever. That is our political, governmental, and yes, even our educational institutions. And one of the things that I would love to see is young people be able to have faith in institutions again because of their college experience. That they're not only having faith in colleges and universities and what they can offer, but they use that as an environment and through their intellectual curiosity make our institutions better, right? That's actually what should happen. So I want that to be part of what happened, the 5 to 10 year plan, if you will, for college and universities. I want the universities to be more reflective of the country that they're in, both in terms of race and class, to be able to be accepting of more people, not be more exclusive, but more inclusive. And that is top to bottom. And that's for every school, whether it be state or private. I take the point about U.S. News and World Report because one of the things that we should be, there was a period of time where going to high school, when I was coming out of high school, just having a high school degree was kind of enough. And then we started to push people into college. So I acknowledge that college isn't for everyone. But I want to make sure that if you want to go, that you can flourish. And my quick example is my godson. I desperately wanted him to go to Cornell, where I went undergrad, took him up to the campus, showed him around, did everything that I was supposed to do as a great Cornell alum and godfather. And he chose to go to Morehouse, which I love and is a fantastic institution. And you know what? That young man has flourished beyond my dreams and his father's dreams, who is one of my dearest friends. So it proves that sometimes young people know themselves better than we think they know them or what's good for them. And we have to give them the tools to be able to make those kinds of decisions for themselves, because they know the kind of environment where they'll flourish. And as long as that environment can help bring those things to the table for them to be able to succeed, I want us as intellectuals, as college scholars and administrators, faculty members who are in the care of our future, to be able to all be partners in that.
Well, I want to thank you all for being such interesting and articulate speakers today. This was a tremendous discussion. I want to thank all of us for our time and brain power. And and just conclude and send it back to Fulbright for the final closing remarks. So thank you all so much.
Thank you, Dr. Levander, and thank you to our panelists, Dr. Basil Smikle, Dr. Paul Boxer, and Mr. James Colman, for sharing your insights today. And thank you all for joining us. I'm Dr. Aaron Kleist, president of the Greater Los Angeles chapter of the Fulbright Association. I'm a professor of English at Basil University, was raised internationally in Saipan, Saudi Arabia, and Egypt, and have served as a Fulbright scholar in Bulgaria, and as a Fulbright specialist in Switzerland, Germany, and Belarus. These experiences have reinforced my belief in the power of global exchange and the importance of innovation in higher education. The Greater Los Angeles chapter is a metropolitan area chapter, serving Fulbright alum and friends of international exchange. We focus on hosting engaging programs and events in partnership with local universities. For example, our annual opening reception in Los Angeles brings together Fulbright alum and visiting scholars to build connections and celebrate our shared mission. Through events like these, we advocate for international education and the Fulbright program's vision of cultural understanding and peace. Today's discussion reminded us that values-driven leadership and academic freedom are central to institutional transformation. We heard how universities can adapt to change while upholding core values. As a summary of our panelists' expertise, it could be said that their combined insights are exactly what we need to tackle rapid technological change, economic pressures, and the urgent need for dialogue in higher education. These are challenges that require collaboration across institutions and across borders. Please continue to stay engaged with the Fulbright community, whether by joining special programs like this one, participating in local chapter initiatives, or connecting with alumni networks. Your involvement sustains the Fulbright mission of fostering international understanding. Also, save the date for the Fulbright Association's 48th Annual Conference, taking place from October 24th to 26th at Florida International University in Miami. Registration is still open and can be found on our website, www.fulbright.org. You don't need to be a Fulbrighter to attend. Everyone interested in international exchange, higher level education, and global collaboration is welcome. On behalf of the Fulbright Association, thank you again to Dr. Levander and our panelists, and thanks to all of you for tuning in. We look forward to continuing these important conversations in future programs.